My grandmother left her fortune to the grandchild who loves me most. So my cousins decided to eliminate the competition. I should have known something was catastrophically wrong when Marcus texted our family group chat at 2 a.m. Emergency family meeting tomorrow. Grandma Rose wants to see everyone immediately. The message felt different, urgent, desperate, dripping with the kind of barely controlled panic that comes when serious generational wealth is suddenly at stake. Marcus never texted the family unless he wanted something expensive from someone, and he definitely never called emergency family meetings unless there was major inheritance money involved in the discussion. For context, my grandmother Rose was worth exactly $47 million. Real estate empire spanning 3 different states with prime commercial properties, stock portfolio that made seasoned financial advisors weep with pure envy, jewelry collection that could legitimately fund a small developing country's entire national budget, and diversified business investments that generated more passive income, while she slept peacefully than most hardworking people earned during entire calendar years of labor. She'd single-handedly raised 6 traumatized grandchildren after our parents died in various tragic accidents. Multiple car crashes, aggressive cancers, drug overdoses that the family always pretended were accidental to preserve our social standing. The usual cursed family luck that seemed to follow our bloodline like a malevolent supernatural spirit, systematically picking us off one by one until only Rose remained standing strong and defiant. We'd always made uncomfortable dark jokes about inheritance during increasingly awkward family dinners, creating morbid gallows humor about who'd receive what specific valuable assets, when Rose finally kicked the bucket and joined our long-dead parents in whatever afterlife awaited us. But Rose had this absolutely terrifying way of looking directly into your soul that made your spine tingle violently, and your carefully constructed lies shrivel up and die painfully in your throat before you could speak them aloud. Like she possessed supernatural ability to see straight through your elaborate bullshit facade to the actual person you really were underneath all the desperate pretending and carefully maintained social masks. She'd survived the brutal Great Depression by eating literal garbage scraps from restaurant dumpsters and sleeping in freezing abandoned buildings during harsh winters, built an impossible business empire from absolutely nothing but raw determination and absolutely ruthless intelligence, and maintained zero tolerance for weakness, pathetic excuses, self-pity, or anything that remotely resembled whining about life being inherently unfair. Rose had started with nothing but a borrowed $20 and unshakable determination during the worst economic collapse in American history. While other families lost everything to bank failures and foreclosures, she somehow managed to buy distressed properties for pennies on the dollar. By the time the economy recovered, she owned half the commercial real estate in 3 major cities. Her business philosophy was simple but brutal. Trust no one completely, verify everything twice, and always have 3 backup plans for when people inevitably disappoint you. That ominous morning, we gathered solemnly in her intimidating Victorian mansion's formal parlor like guilty suspects lined up in a classic Agatha Christie murder mystery, waiting for the detective's final revelation. The hand-polished mahogany furniture gleamed menacingly under expensive imported crystal chandeliers, and multiple generations of stern family portraits stared down at us with cold, disapproving dead eyes that seemed to judge our corrupt souls and find us wanting. The room itself was a testament to Rose's success. Persian rugs worth more than most people's houses, first edition books lining floor-to-ceiling shelves, and artwork that belonged in museums but somehow ended up decorating her private sanctuary. Marcus, 28, the insufferable golden boy who'd graduated Harvard Business School summa cum laude, and never let anyone forget his academic superiority for even 5 consecutive minutes of conversation. He worked at a prestigious investment firm where he specialized in hostile corporate takeovers, essentially destroying companies for profit while wearing expensive suits and pretending it was for the greater good of capitalism. Sarah, 26, the predatory shark lawyer who specialized in hostile corporate acquisitions and calculated legal destruction, and had never voluntarily visited Rose unless she desperately needed emergency money for her expensive cocaine habit or mounting gambling debts from underground high-stakes poker games where she regularly lost thousands of dollars to criminals who didn't accept credit cards. Twin brothers Jake and Luke, 24, who'd already completely blown through their substantial 6-figure trust funds on luxury sports cars, designer drugs, and month-long Las Vegas weekends that cost more than most people's annual salaries. They were identical in appearance but completely different in personality. Jake was the aggressive one who solved problems with violence and intimidation, while Luke was the manipulative one who preferred psychological warfare and emotional manipulation. Both had dropped out of college multiple times and showed no signs of developing any marketable skills or work ethic. My sister Emma, 22, the genuinely sweet and innocent one who actually called Grandma Rose every single Sunday just to chat warmly about her week and ask detailed questions about Rose's prize-winning garden. Emma was studying to become a pediatric nurse, volunteering at children's hospitals during her free time, and somehow managing to remain optimistic despite growing up in our catastrophically dysfunctional family. She was the only one among us who seemed to have inherited Rose's genuine compassion instead of just her ruthless business instinct. And me, 25, the designated family black sheep who'd been taking comprehensive care of Rose since her devastating stroke last year, when everyone else claimed they were too busy with their allegedly important lives to help. I dropped out of law school to become Rose's full-time caregiver, managing her medications, driving her to doctor appointments, and listening to her stories about building her empire from nothing. Everyone assumed I was doing it for inheritance money, but the truth was simpler. Rose was the only family member who'd ever treated me like a human being instead of a disappointment. Rose sat regally in her motorized wheelchair, eyes sharp and calculating as freshly broken glass, despite the constant oxygen tank that had become her unwelcome companion after the stroke damaged her lung function. Her longtime lawyer, Mr. R. Peterson, stood professionally beside her with official-looking legal documents that made everyone shift nervously in their expensive antique chairs. Peterson had been Rose's legal counsel for over 30 years, and was one of the few people she trusted completely, mainly because she paid him enough to ensure his absolute loyalty and discretion. "I'm dying," she announced matter-of-factly, like casually discussing tomorrow's weather forecast or fluctuating stock market prices. 6 months maximum, maybe significantly less if these expensive doctors are correct about the aggressive cancer spreading rapidly through my organs. So I'm completely changing my will today, and I wanted you all to know immediately. The elegantly appointed room went absolutely dead silent. You could literally hear hearts stopping mid-beat, breath catching painfully in throats, mental calculators frantically computing complex inheritance divisions and potential windfall amounts. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds of pure, concentrated greed mixed with barely concealed panic. Instead of splitting everything equally among you like you've been confidently expecting your entire privileged lives, I'm leaving my complete $47 million fortune to whichever grandchild demonstrates they love me most genuinely. She smiled that absolutely terrifying, predatory smile that had made ruthless business rivals surrender entire companies without firing a single legal shot. You have until Christmas Day, exactly 3 months from today, to prove your devotion conclusively. The announcement hit the room like a financial nuclear bomb. Marcus's face went through several color changes, from pale shock to red anger to calculating determination. Sarah immediately started taking notes on her legal pad, probably already planning her strategy to contest the will or manipulate the competition. The twins just stared at each other with identical expressions of confusion and growing panic. They'd been counting on their inheritance to fund their lifestyle indefinitely. Marcus leaned forward eagerly, already calculating potential angles like the Harvard-trained corporate shark he'd become. "How exactly do we prove love, Grandma? What are the specific measurable criteria for evaluation?" "Actions, not empty words. I'll be watching everything you do, everything you say, everything you think I can't see or hear." Her piercing eyes swept across us like prison searchlights hunting for escaped convicts. "The person who truly loves me will reveal themselves naturally through consistent behavior." Emma looked genuinely distressed. Not about the money, but about Rose's deteriorating health. "Grandma, are you sure about this? Maybe we should just focus on spending time together instead of competing." Rose's expression softened slightly when she looked at Emma. "Sweet child, this isn't about competition. It's about truth, about seeing who people really are when money is involved." After she was carefully wheeled away for her mandatory afternoon nap by her private duty nurse, we huddled together in the massive commercial-grade kitchen like guilty conspirators planning a revolution. The entire emotional energy had shifted completely from awkward family reunion to something much darker, more dangerous, and infinitely more desperate. The kitchen itself was larger than most people's entire apartments, with professional-grade appliances and enough counter space to cater a wedding. "This is absolutely insane," Sarah muttered frantically, pacing back and forth like a caged predator. "We should contest it immediately through probate court. Get her declared mentally incompetent due to medication effects." "On what legal grounds?" Marcus asked with calculated coolness. "She's mentally sharp as ever, probably significantly sharper than any of us combined. Peterson will testify to her competency, and she just demonstrated perfect awareness of her situation." Emma looked genuinely worried, her naturally pale face becoming ghostly white. "Maybe she just wants to see us more frequently before she, passes away. Maybe this inheritance competition isn't really about money at all." "Wake up and smell reality, Emma," Jake interrupted harshly, his voice dripping with contempt. "This is about exactly $47 million in liquid assets. The game just changed completely, and there's only going to be one ultimate winner standing." Luke nodded in agreement with his twin. "We can't afford to be sentimental about this. $47 million divided by 6 is still life-changing money. But $47 million for one person? That's generational wealth." That's when I noticed the meaningful look that passed silently between Marcus and Sarah. Something cold, calculating, and absolutely terrifying. Like they were already mentally planning something that would make the rest of us very unhappy, very quickly. I'd seen that look before during family arguments. It usually preceded someone getting emotionally destroyed or financially ruined. Sarah stopped pacing and pulled out her phone. "I need to make some calls. Research the legal precedents for this kind of will structure. And I need to review Grandma's financial portfolios," Marcus added. "Understand exactly what we're competing for." Over the next few days, the family dynamics shifted dramatically. Everyone started visiting Rose with suspicious frequency, bringing gifts and offering help with increasingly desperate enthusiasm. The mansion, which had been quiet and peaceful during my year of caregiving, suddenly became a busy hub of fake affection and transparent manipulation. Marcus showed up every morning with expensive flowers, always roses, obviously, and insisted on helping with Rose's financial paperwork. He'd spend hours in her study, supposedly organizing her investments while actually photographing every document when he thought no one was looking. His Harvard business training made him confident he could optimize Rose's portfolio better than her current financial advisors, and he wasn't shy about sharing his opinions. Sarah arrived each afternoon with legal documents, claiming they were routine updates to protect Rose's assets from potential government seizure or tax complications. She'd spread papers across Rose's dining room table and explain complex legal concepts in a condescending tone, as if Rose hadn't been navigating business law successfully for 60 years. What Sarah didn't realize was that Rose had been recording every conversation, building her own case file of everyone's true motivations. The twins developed a sudden fascination with Rose's war stories and business empire founding history, recording everything on their expensive smartphones with professional quality audio apps. They'd sit for hours listening to Rose describe her early struggles during the Depression, asking detailed questions about her strategies and methods. What they were really doing was creating content they could sell to documentary filmmakers or biographers after Rose died, monetizing her life story for their own benefit. But Emma stopped coming to visit altogether after the first week. When I asked why during our weekly coffee date at her favorite downtown cafe, she showed me the horrifying photographs with trembling hands. Someone had been systematically following her everywhere she went. Professional quality surveillance pictures of her at work, at the grocery store, getting out of her car, walking her rescued dog around the neighborhood park, all with precise timestamps, all recent, all clearly meant to terrify her into staying completely away from Rose and the inheritance competition. "I'm genuinely scared," she admitted, hands shaking violently as she showed me image after disturbing image. "I think they're absolutely serious about physically hurting me if I don't back off permanently." The photos were professionally taken with expensive equipment, showing Emma from multiple angles and distances. Whoever had taken them had been following her for weeks, learning her routine and documenting her vulnerabilities. There were pictures of her apartment building, her workplace, even the inside of her favorite coffee shop. Someone had been studying her like a target. 2 weeks later, Emma called me at 3 a.m., sobbing hysterically into the phone. "Someone broke into my apartment tonight," she whispered, her voice shaking uncontrollably with pure terror. "They didn't take anything valuable like electronics or jewelry, but they left something behind that's much worse." "What kind of something?" I asked urgently, already grabbing my car keys and jacket. "A note. A professionally typed note that says, 'Stop visiting Grandma Rose immediately, or things will get much worse for you.'" My stomach dropped like I'd swallowed molten lead. I drove straight to her apartment complex through empty streets and found her waiting terrified in the brightly lit lobby, too scared to go back upstairs alone to her violated sanctuary. The note was typed perfectly on plain white paper with no identifying marks, completely untraceable, with no fingerprints or DNA evidence visible. The break-in had been professional. No forced entry, no damage to the locks, no signs of violence or ransacking. Someone with lockpicking skills had entered quietly, left their message, and disappeared without disturbing anything else. It was a precision intimidation operation designed to terrify Emma without leaving evidence that could be traced back to the perpetrators. That night, I secretly installed multiple hidden security cameras around Rose's entire property without telling anyone in the family. What I captured over the next week made my blood run completely cold with horror. The high-definition footage showed Marcus and Sarah meeting secretly in Rose's moonlit garden at exactly midnight, thinking everyone was safely asleep. I enhanced the audio quality using sophisticated software I'd learned about online and heard every single word of their chilling conversation. "Emma's still clearly the obvious favorite," Sarah was saying, cigarette smoke curling around her words like poison. "Rose's whole face lights up like Christmas morning whenever someone even mentions Emma's name. She's definitely the biggest threat to our chances. Then we need to eliminate her from the competition permanently," Marcus replied, with the emotional warmth of a corporate restructuring announcement. "Remove her from the equation entirely." "What exactly are you suggesting here?" Sarah asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "An accident. Something believable that won't point back to us legally. You're an experienced lawyer. You know exactly how to make problems disappear completely without leaving any evidence trail." My hands were literally shaking violently as I watched my own blood cousins coldly planning to hurt innocent Emma. But their evil conversation got exponentially worse from there. "What about the designated black sheep?" Sarah asked, meaning me specifically. "He's been taking care of her daily, doing all the medical grunt work and earning sympathy points. Rose still sees him as the family disappointment who never amounted to anything meaningful. We just need to make sure he stays that way in her mind permanently." Marcus pulled out a folder filled with documents. "I've been researching his background. Law school dropout, no steady employment history, history of depression and anxiety. We can paint him as unstable and manipulative." Sarah nodded approvingly. "And I've been documenting every conversation I've had with Rose about him. She's mentioned feeling sorry for him, feeling obligated to help him. We can use that to show he's taking advantage of her sympathy." They spent another hour planning their psychological warfare campaign against Emma and me, discussing specific lies they would tell Rose, evidence they would manufacture, and ways to make us look like greedy manipulators while positioning themselves as Rose's protectors. That's when I finally understood the complete bigger picture. Emma's apartment break-in, the professionally typed threatening note, the systematic surveillance photographs. They were strategically removing anyone who threatened their inheritance chances, using psychological fear and physical intimidation as calculated weapons. The next morning, I called Emma immediately and told her everything I'd discovered. "We have to go to the police immediately," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard in weeks. "With what concrete evidence? A recorded conversation about inheritance money? They haven't actually committed any prosecutable crimes yet being the absolutely terrifying keyword here. I made a potentially life-changing decision. Pack a bag right now. You're staying with me until this nightmare is completely over, and we're going to beat them at their own evil game. For the next month, I documented everything obsessively like a private investigator building a case. Marcus bringing expensive gifts while secretly photographing Rose's private financial documents and personal papers when she wasn't looking. Sarah having Rose sign complex legal papers that weren't really routine updates. They were systematically giving Sarah comprehensive power of attorney in case Rose became medically incapacitated. The twins weren't just sharing war stories. They were recording them with professional equipment, probably planning to sell exclusive rights to documentary filmmakers or celebrity biographers later. I also discovered they'd been conducting their own investigations into Emma's and my personal lives, looking for ammunition they could use against us. Marcus had hired a private investigator to dig up embarrassing information about my law school failure and subsequent mental health struggles. Sarah had been interviewing Emma's former employers and college friends, looking for anyone who might say something negative about her character. Meanwhile, I kept doing exactly what I'd always done naturally, helping Rose with her complex daily medication schedule, which involved 12 different prescriptions taken at specific times throughout the day, reading classic novels to her when her eyes were too tired for books. Her favorites were Victorian literature and mystery novels, especially anything by Agatha Christie. Listening patiently to her stories about building her business empire from absolutely nothing, stories I'd heard dozens of times but never grew tired of hearing. Rose had an incredible memory for details, even at her age. She could recall specific conversations from 50 years ago, remember the exact prices she'd paid for properties during the Depression, and describe complex business negotiations with perfect accuracy. Her mind was still sharp despite her physical deterioration. "You know what I've learned in 86 years of life?" she asked one evening as I carefully adjusted her pillows and checked her oxygen levels. "What's that, Grandma?" "People show you exactly who they really are when serious money's involved. The ones who genuinely love you keep loving you exactly the same way. The ones who don't, well, they reveal their true evil nature." She was testing us systematically. She'd always been testing us, even before the dramatic inheritance announcement. Every conversation, every interaction, every request for help had been a small test of our character and motivations. That night, I heard careful footsteps in the hallway outside Rose's bedroom. I grabbed the aluminum baseball bat I'd started keeping by my bed and crept toward her room. The door was slightly open, and I could see a shadowy figure standing directly over her sleeping form. Marcus. He was holding a large pillow in both hands, positioned directly above her peaceful face. "What the hell are you doing?" I whispered harshly, stepping into the doorway with the bat raised threateningly. He spun around quickly, pillow still clutched in his guilty hands. She was having trouble breathing normally. I was just trying to help her get more comfortable. But Rose was sleeping peacefully, breathing normally and steadily. The medical oxygen tank was working perfectly fine, providing steady flow at the prescribed rate. "Get out right now," I said, gripping the bat tighter with white knuckles. "You're being completely paranoid," he said defensively, but he backed toward the door quickly. "This whole stressful situation is making everyone crazy and suspicious of normal behavior." After he left, I installed a hidden camera directly in Rose's bedroom. What I captured over the next week made me physically sick to my stomach. Marcus had been coming into her room every single night, not to hurt Rose physically, but to whisper poisonous lies directly in her ear while she slept. Systematic psychological warfare disguised as concerned grandson behavior. "He's only here for your money, Grandma. He told Emma he can't wait for you to die so he can inherit everything and move to California. He's been stealing cash from your purse when you're not looking. He laughs about your war stories behind your back, calls them boring old lady rambling that puts him to sleep, night after night, systematically poisoning her dreams and subconscious mind against me. The psychological manipulation was sophisticated and cruel, designed to undermine my relationship with Rose while she was most vulnerable. Sarah's approach was even more medically sinister. She'd been systematically switching Rose's essential heart medications with completely harmless placebos, making her condition deteriorate much faster than natural. The pills I thought were helping stabilize her serious heart condition were just sugar tablets disguised as life-saving medicine. But what I discovered next made everything else pale in comparison. While going through Sarah's briefcase that she'd left in Rose's study, I found detailed architectural plans of the mansion, specifically highlighting structural weak points in the staircase and balcony railings. There were also printed emails between Sarah and a contractor discussing accident-prone modifications to the handrails in Rose's bathroom and bedroom. They weren't just planning to eliminate the competition. They were planning to stage Rose's death to look accidental, probably after she'd signed over power of attorney to Sarah. The emails revealed their complete plan. Sarah would gain control of Rose's assets through the power of attorney documents, then arrange for strategic accidents around the house. The inheritance competition was just a distraction, while they positioned themselves to take everything. I also discovered they'd been slowly poisoning Rose's mind against Emma and me through more than just Marcus's midnight whispers. Sarah had been forging emails and text messages, making it appear that Emma and I were constantly talking about Rose's money behind her back. She'd created an entire fake paper trail of conversations that never happened, planning to present them as evidence if Rose ever questioned their motives. The depth of their planning was absolutely staggering. They had backup plans for their backup plans. If the accident approach didn't work, they'd prepared evidence to have Rose declared mentally incompetent. If that failed, they'd arranged for Emma and me to be framed for elder abuse. They'd even researched private investigators who could be bribed to provide false testimony. But their biggest mistake was underestimating Rose herself, and underestimating how far I'd go to protect the people I loved. I spent the next 2 weeks gathering additional evidence. I broke into Marcus's apartment while he was at work and found detailed floor plans of Rose's house with marked escape routes and timing charts. He'd been planning this for months, studying Rose's daily routine down to the minute. In Sarah's home office, I discovered a disturbing collection of research about inheritance law, elder abuse cases, and successful insurance fraud schemes. She'd studied dozens of cases where family members had successfully manipulated elderly relatives. There were printed articles about families who'd staged accidents and gotten away with it. Most horrifying was a detailed psychological profile she'd written about Rose, analyzing her weaknesses and triggers. Sarah had been studying our grandmother like a predator studying prey, looking for the most effective ways to manipulate and control her. I also found evidence that they'd been drugging the twins to keep them compliant. Jake and Luke's recent erratic behavior wasn't just stress about the inheritance. Marcus and Sarah had been slipping them sedatives to keep them docile and uninvolved. The twins had no idea they were being used as pawns in a larger game. The investigation led me to discover they'd already attempted to kill Rose once before. 3 months ago, when Rose had her fall down the stairs that everyone attributed to her weakening condition, it hadn't been an accident. Marcus had loosened the stair railings and Sarah had given Rose medications that would cause dizziness and disorientation. Rose had survived because of pure luck and my quick response in calling the paramedics. But they'd learned from that failed attempt and were planning something more foolproof this time. I realized they were escalating their timeline. The inheritance competition deadline was still weeks away, but they couldn't wait. Rose was getting suspicious, asking too many questions about the legal documents Sarah kept bringing her to sign. That's when I discovered their final plan. They were going to stage a home invasion gone wrong. Marcus had already hired criminals through his underground contacts, the same people who'd broken into Emma's apartment. The plan was to make it look like burglars had killed Rose during a robbery, with Sarah conveniently being the only family member with legal access to the estate. Emma and I would be framed as the masterminds, since we were the ones living closest to Rose and had the most access to the house. They'd already planted evidence in my apartment. I found it during a search after becoming paranoid about their reach. But I had one advantage they didn't know about. Rose had been testing us from the beginning, but she'd also been testing them, and she was far more aware of their schemes than they realized. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. During what was supposed to be a routine family dinner, I walked into the dining room to find Marcus holding a knife to Emma's throat, while Sarah stood over Rose with a syringe. "You've been a problem," Sarah said calmly, as if discussing business. "Too curious, too protective. It's time to accelerate our timeline." Emma's eyes were wide with terror, and Rose looked genuinely frightened for the first time since I'd known her. "Let them go," I said, stepping into the room with my hands raised. "This is between us." "No, it's about $47 million, Marcus replied, pressing the knife closer to Emma's neck. "And you've been standing in our way." That's when I activated the live stream I'd set up on my phone. Every word, every action was being broadcast directly to the police station, where Detective Morrison was watching in real time. "You're making a mistake," I said, trying to buy time. "Rose isn't as helpless as you think." Sarah laughed bitterly. "The old woman can barely walk. What's she going to do?" That's when Rose spoke from her wheelchair, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "I can do this." She pressed a hidden button on her wheelchair, and every door in the house locked automatically. Steel shutters dropped over the windows. The mansion's security system activated, trapping everyone inside. "What the hell?" Marcus screamed, loosening his grip on Emma just enough for her to break free. "I've been preparing for this for months," Rose said calmly. "Ever since I realized what you were planning. The inheritance competition was just bait to make you reveal your true intentions." Police sirens were already approaching the house. Sarah lunged at Rose with the syringe, but I tackled her before she could reach her target. The needle went flying across the room, shattering against the marble floor. Marcus tried to run, but the locked doors trapped him. He turned on me with the knife, wild with desperation. "You ruined everything!" We fought viciously, crashing into furniture and breaking priceless antiques. He was younger and stronger, but I was fighting for my family's lives. Emma grabbed a heavy candlestick and struck him from behind, just as he was about to stab me. He collapsed unconscious as the police finally breached the security system and stormed into the house. Sarah was still fighting like a cornered animal, screaming about her rights and threatening lawsuits even as they put her in handcuffs. "You can't prove anything. This is all a setup." But we had everything on video. The live stream had captured their confessions, their threats, their attempted murder. There was no denying what they'd done. As the paramedics checked on Rose and Emma, Detective Morrison pulled me aside. "We've been investigating them for weeks based on your tips," he said. "But this live confession was exactly what we needed. They're looking at life sentences." The twins, who'd been found drugged and unconscious in the garden shed, were taken to the hospital. They'd been completely unaware of the violence, sedated to keep them out of the way during the final confrontation. Rose, despite everything she'd been through, insisted on making her final will changes that very night. With Mr. Peterson and the police as witnesses, she signed the documents that would secure Emma's and my future. "I want this finished tonight," she said firmly. "I won't give them any chance to challenge this from prison." The next few months were a blur of trials, media attention, and legal proceedings. Marcus and Sarah both received life sentences without the possibility of parole. The evidence against them was overwhelming. The recordings, the forged documents, the attempted murders, everything. The twins, once they recovered from the drugs, were horrified to learn what had almost happened. They'd been unknowing pawns in a game that could have killed their entire family. Jake immediately entered rehab, and Luke started therapy to deal with the trauma of discovering how close they'd come to being accessories to murder. 6 months after the trial ended, Rose passed peacefully in her sleep. Emma and I were by her side, holding her hands as she slipped away naturally, surrounded by love instead of the violence Marcus and Sarah had planned. Her final words were simple. You showed up when it mattered most. The reading of the will was a formality at this point. Emma received $30 million and immediately enrolled in medical school to specialize in geriatric care. The twins each received $2 million, enough to rebuild their lives if they made better choices. I inherited the remaining $15 million, along with the mansion and all of Rose's business holdings. But more importantly, I inherited the knowledge that I'd protected the people who mattered most when they needed it. Emma and I used a large portion of our inheritance to start the Rose Foundation, dedicated to protecting elderly people from financial abuse and family manipulation. We also funded a legal clinic that helps families navigate inheritance disputes without resorting to violence. The foundation has helped hundreds of elderly people protect themselves from predatory family members and financial scammers. We've trained social workers to recognize signs of elder abuse, funded legal aid for seniors who can't afford attorneys, and created safe housing for elderly people who need to escape dangerous family situations. Marcus died in prison 3 years later, killed by another inmate who didn't appreciate people who hurt elderly relatives. Sarah is still serving her sentence, working in the prison laundry and writing letters to legal aid organizations claiming her innocence. The twins have both rebuilt their lives successfully. Jake is 5 years sober and works as a counselor for addiction recovery. Luke finished college and became a social worker, specializing in family crisis intervention. They visit Emma and me occasionally, grateful that we saved them from becoming accessories to murder. Sometimes I drive past the old Victorian mansion, now converted into a senior living facility through our foundation. Elderly residents sit on the wraparound porch, playing cards and sharing stories, protected by security systems and careful staff screening that prevent the kind of abuse Rose almost suffered. Emma visits the facility weekly as part of her medical practice, treating residents who remind her of our grandmother. She's married now, to a fellow doctor who treats her like the treasure she is. They're expecting their first child next spring, a little girl they plan to name Rose. And me? I learned that inheritance isn't just about money. It's about values, character, and the choices you make when faced with impossible situations. Rose left me more than just millions. She left me the knowledge that when it mattered most, when evil was wearing the mask of family and love was being weaponized for greed, I chose to protect instead of profit. The real inheritance wasn't the money. It was the lesson that some things are worth fighting for, even when the odds seem impossible. I had shown up when it mattered most, and that made all the difference in the world. I pretended to support my brother's wedding to his gold digger fiancé, then dropped the evidence at the altar. My brother Jake was always the golden child, star athlete, honor roll student, first to graduate college. When he brought Meredith home for Christmas, my parents practically started planning the wedding before dessert was served. She's perfect for him, Mom gushed, watching Meredith laugh at Dad's terrible jokes. Finally, someone who appreciates what a catch he is. I wanted to believe it. Jake deserved happiness after his messy divorce from Sarah, who'd cleaned out their joint accounts and disappeared with her yoga instructor. He'd spent 2 years rebuilding his life, working 16-hour days and avoiding relationships entirely. The betrayal had gutted him. I'd found him crying in his empty apartment, surrounded by legal papers and divorce documents, wondering what he'd done wrong. I gave her everything, he'd said that night. I thought we were building a life together. When he finally started dating again, we were all desperate for him to find someone genuine, someone who would see past his success to the man underneath. The guy who still sent flowers to our mom on her birthday, who coached Little League on weekends, who'd driven 14 hours straight when our cousin had been in a car accident. But something felt wrong about Meredith from the moment she walked through our front door. She was beautiful, charming, and said all the right things. Too right. Like she'd rehearsed every conversation. When Jake left the room to grab drinks or use the bathroom, her smile would drop for just a second before snapping back into place. She'd study family photos on our mantle with an intensity that made my skin crawl, asking detailed questions about every face, every vacation, every milestone. "Who's this distinguished gentleman?" she'd ask, pointing to our grandfather's portrait. "He looks so successful. What kind of business was he in?" "Real estate development," Mom would answer proudly. "He built half the shopping centers in town." I'd watch Meredith's eyes light up as she filed away another piece of financial information. The red flags started small but multiplied quickly. Meredith always had an excuse when the check came at restaurants. "Oops, forgot my wallet again." She'd order the most expensive item on the menu, lobster, aged steaks, premium cocktails, then claim she wasn't that hungry halfway through. Jake would laugh it off and pay for everything, plus leave a generous tip to compensate for her barely touched meals. "She's just forgetful," he'd say when I mentioned her convenient amnesia. "And she's been stressed about work lately. You know how demanding marketing can be." Her job was another mystery that grew more confusing the more I paid attention. She claimed to work in marketing for a tech startup called Digital Dynamics, but her schedule was completely random. Sometimes she'd be in urgent client meetings at 11 p.m. on a Sunday. Other times she'd be completely free all day on a busy Wednesday. When I asked about her company's name or what products they marketed, she'd give vague answers about digital solutions and streamlining business processes, before quickly changing the subject. "You know how these tech companies are," she'd say with a dismissive wave. "Everything's proprietary and confidential. I've signed so many NDAs I can barely talk about what I had for lunch." I tried looking up Digital Dynamics online. No website, no LinkedIn company page, no business registration that I could find. When I mentioned this to Jake, he got defensive. "Not every company has a huge online presence," he said. "Some businesses prefer to keep a low profile. You're being paranoid." But paranoia felt justified when I started noticing other inconsistencies. Meredith claimed to live in a downtown apartment, but I never saw her car parked there when I drove by. She said she was from Oregon originally, but her accent would slip occasionally, revealing hints of something more southern. She knew detailed information about our family that Jake swore he'd never shared with her. How did you know our grandmother's middle name? I asked her once after she'd mentioned it casually. Jake told me, she said without missing a beat. But when I asked Jake later, he looked confused. I've never told anyone Grandma's middle name. Hell, I barely remember it myself. The turning point came during Easter dinner when I overheard her on the phone in our guest bathroom. I'd gone upstairs to grab aspirin from the medicine cabinet when I heard her whispering urgently behind the closed door. The wedding has to be before his grandmother dies, she hissed into the phone. That inheritance won't transfer if we're not married. The lawyers were very clear about the marriage clause in the will. Just keep playing sick until then, and we'll split everything 60-40 like we discussed. My blood ran cold. Jake's grandmother had been battling pancreatic cancer for months, growing weaker with each chemotherapy session. The family business, a successful chain of hardware stores built over 3 generations, and the family property were set to pass to Jake when she died, but only if he was married. An old-fashioned clause from the 1940s that everyone had forgotten about except the estate lawyers who'd mentioned it during a recent will review, except Meredith somehow knew about it. I pressed my ear to the door, my heart hammering as she continued. I don't care what you have to do. Delay the diagnosis, lose the paperwork, give her the wrong medications, whatever keeps her alive until I get that ring on my finger. We need 6 more weeks minimum. Once we're married and the old lady croaks, I'll divorce him and we'll be set for life. The business alone is worth $2 million plus the property portfolio. The voice on the other end was muffled, but I heard enough to know this was planned. Orchestrated. My brother was being systematically destroyed by someone he trusted completely, and our grandmother was apparently being kept sick to serve Meredith's timeline. Make sure the next round of chemo is especially harsh, she continued. I need her weak enough that nobody questions it when she finally dies, but not so weak that she dies before the wedding. We've come too far to mess this up now. I pulled out my phone and started recording, my hands shaking as I captured every word. The backup plan is still the life insurance policies, right? She asked. If something goes wrong with the inheritance, Jake's worth $1.2 million in coverage. But the marriage route is cleaner. No investigations, no suspicious deaths to explain. I nearly dropped my phone. She was planning to kill my brother. After she hung up, I slipped into the guest bedroom and waited for her to leave the bathroom. When she finally emerged, she was back to her sweet, concerned girlfriend persona, asking my mother if there was anything she could do to help with dinner preparation. That night, I started my investigation in earnest. When Jake's college friends visited for his birthday party, Meredith would disappear with sudden, debilitating migraines that required dark rooms and complete silence. But I caught her researching his social media from the guest room, memorizing details about people she'd supposedly never met. She had spiral notebooks filled with information, inside jokes, shared memories, embarrassing college stories, career details, family connections, everything she'd need to seem like the perfect girlfriend who just happened to miss meeting his closest friends due to her chronic health issues. My headaches get so bad around large groups, she'd explain later, touching Jake's arm with practiced sympathy. All that noise and energy just overwhelms my system. I'm so sorry I couldn't meet everyone properly. Jake would feel guilty for having friends over, for planning social events, for living his life in a way that caused his girlfriend pain. I found credit reports in her purse when she asked me to grab her lip balm from her bag. Not just Jake's, his whole family's, including mine and our parents. She'd been running comprehensive background checks on all of us, mapping our financial situations like a military strategist planning an invasion. The reports were thorough, showing bank account numbers, credit scores, investment portfolios, property values, even our employment histories and salary ranges. The papers were dated 3 months before she and Jake had supposedly met by chance at a coffee shop near his office. She'd been hunting him specifically. The worst discovery came when I borrowed her laptop to print wedding invitations, claiming my printer was broken. Her browser history was a masterclass in manipulation and criminal planning. How to rush a wedding timeline. Inheritance laws by state. Making men propose faster. Signs your boyfriend's family is wealthy. How to access spouse's accounts after marriage. Digitalis poisoning symptoms. Making heart attacks look natural. Life insurance payout timelines. But the most chilling search was recent. How to trigger heart attacks in elderly cancer patients without detection. I screenshot everything, my hands shaking as I documented months of calculated deception and what appeared to be murder planning. For weeks, I gathered evidence like I was building a federal case. Photos of documents, recorded conversations, bank statements showing her mounting debts. She owed $47,000 across 7 credit cards and had 2 active judgments against her for unpaid loans, totaling another $23,000. Her car was 3 months behind on payments and scheduled for repossession. She'd been evicted from 2 apartments in the past year for non-payment of rent. Jake was her lottery ticket, and she was running out of time. I discovered she'd been married twice before, both to wealthy older men who died under suspicious circumstances. The first husband, Harold Brennan, had suffered a massive heart attack at 52 despite no prior cardiac issues. The second, Robert Martinez, had fallen down the stairs at his home at age 58, breaking his neck. Both deaths were ruled accidental after brief investigations, and both wives inherited everything: substantial life insurance policies, business assets, real estate portfolios. Meredith wasn't just a gold digger. She was a serial killer with a specific type. I tried approaching this carefully, sharing small concerns with my family first. But Meredith had already positioned herself as the victim of my jealousy and mental health struggles. When I mentioned her strange work schedule, she'd confided in my mother about her severe anxiety disorder that made regular employment difficult. When I questioned her financial contributions to their relationship, she'd tearfully explained to my father how her abusive ex-husband had destroyed her credit out of spite and left her financially devastated. "I'm so embarrassed about my situation," she'd sobbed to my parents. "Jake knows everything and accepts me anyway, but Sarah seems to think I'm some kind of gold digger just because I'm not wealthy like your family." Every concern I raised, she'd already crafted a sympathetic explanation for. She was always one step ahead, painting me as the unstable, jealous sister who couldn't handle her brother moving on. Jake was completely blind to it all. Love does that to people, especially people who've been hurt before. He was so grateful to find someone who seemed to accept him completely, who praised his kindness and success, who made him feel like a hero again after Sarah's betrayal, that he ignored every red flag I tried to point out. "She makes me feel like myself again," he'd say when I expressed concerns. "For the first time since Sarah, I'm not worried about being betrayed. Meredith's been through her own hell. She understands what it's like to have someone you trust hurt you." The irony was devastating. She was playing his trauma against him, using his fear of being hurt again to make him ignore signs that he was being hurt in exactly the same way. 2 weeks before the wedding, I made copies of everything and went to the police. Detective Morrison listened patiently as I laid out the evidence. The recordings, the financial documents, the browser history, the pattern of dead husbands. But his expression grew increasingly skeptical as I spoke. "Ma'am, being in debt isn't a crime," he said finally. "Even researching inheritance laws isn't illegal if she's planning to marry into the family." As for the previous husbands, both cases were thoroughly investigated at the time. Without concrete evidence of a current crime, this sounds like a family dispute. "She's planning to kill my brother," I insisted, "and possibly my grandmother." "The phone conversation I recorded could be interpreted multiple ways," he interrupted. "Defense attorneys are very good at creating reasonable doubt. Keep playing sick could mean a lot of things that aren't criminal." He was right, legally, but I knew what I knew. "What if she actually hurt someone?" I asked. "Then we'll investigate," he said. "But we can't arrest people for crimes they might commit based on internet searches and suspicious timing." The night before the wedding, I tried one last desperate attempt to reach my brother. "Jake, we need to talk about Meredith. Please, just listen to me for 5 minutes before you say anything." He cut me off before I could even begin, his face flushed with anger and exhaustion from wedding stress. "I'm not listening to this jealousy anymore," he said. "You've been trying to sabotage us since day one. Every time I'm happy, you find something wrong with it. Sarah poisoned you against the idea of me being in a relationship. This isn't about Sarah or my feelings about your relationships. It's exactly about Sarah," he exploded, his voice echoing through his apartment. "You think every woman is going to hurt me like she did? Well, guess what? Meredith isn't Sarah. She loves me for who I am, not what I have. She's been through hell herself and came out stronger." His words stung because part of them were true. I had been protective of him since his divorce, maybe overly so. But this was different. "Jake, she knows about Grandma's inheritance clause. She's been planning this marriage as a business transaction." "Enough!" He stood up, towering over me. "If you can't support my happiness, if you can't see that I found someone who genuinely cares about me, then maybe you shouldn't be at my wedding tomorrow." The threat hit like a physical blow. Jake and I had been inseparable growing up. He'd walked me to school when kids bullied me about my thick glasses and secondhand clothes. I'd helped him through his divorce, holding him while he cried over Sarah's betrayal, and promising him he'd find real love someday. The idea of losing him to someone who was planning to destroy him was unbearable, but I knew what I had to do. The next morning, I put on my bridesmaid dress, a soft lavender that Meredith had chosen because it would photograph beautifully and complement her wedding photos. I did my makeup carefully, fixed my hair into the elegant updo she'd requested, and smiled through the pre-wedding photos at her parents' house. I hugged Meredith and told her she looked absolutely stunning in her $8,000 designer dress that Jake had insisted on paying for, despite her protests. "You're going to make my brother so happy," I said, the lie tasting bitter in my mouth. I posed with the bridal party and made small talk about flowers and honeymoon plans, nodding enthusiastically when she described their planned 2-week trip to Italy, another expensive vacation that Jake was funding, all while carrying a folder of evidence carefully hidden in a specially sewn pocket inside my dress. The ceremony was held at the Riverside Country Club, Jake's dream wedding venue that he'd talked about since we were kids. 300 guests filled the elegant ballroom, business associates, college friends, extended family, and community members who'd known our family for decades. Meredith had insisted on the most expensive package: open bar, 7-course dinner, live band, elaborate floral arrangements that cost more than most people's cars. Every detail was designed to impress people she'd never see again after she collected her payout. As I walked down the aisle in front of the bride, carrying a bouquet of white roses and lavender that matched my dress, I caught sight of my grandmother in the front row. She looked heartbreakingly frail in her wheelchair, the cancer treatments having stolen most of her energy and nearly 40 pounds from her once robust frame. But her eyes were bright with joy as she watched her grandson's wedding, her face glowing with happiness at seeing him find love again. She had no idea she was watching her own murder plot unfold in real time. The officiant, Pastor Williams, who'd known our family for 20 years, began the ceremony with a reading from Corinthians about love being patient and kind. Jake stood at the altar looking happier than I'd seen him in years, his face glowing with genuine joy as Meredith approached in her flowing white gown. She looked like something from a fairy tale, which I suppose was exactly the point. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to celebrate the union of Jacob Michael Sterling, and Meredith Ann Collins in holy matrimony, Pastor Williams began, his warm voice carrying easily through the flower-filled ballroom. My heart pounded as he continued through the traditional ceremony. This was really happening. In minutes, my brother would be legally bound to someone who was planning to kill him for money, someone who might have already murdered 2 other men. Marriage is not to be entered into lightly, but reverently, deliberately, and in accordance with the purposes for which it was instituted by God. It signifies the mystical union between Christ and his church, and it is therefore not to be undertaken carelessly or selfishly, but thoughtfully and in the love of God. I thought about all the evidence hidden in my dress. The credit reports showing her massive debts, the browser history documenting searches for murder methods, the recorded phone conversation about keeping our grandmother sick, the pattern of dead husbands who'd all died unexpectedly after marrying her. Would anyone believe me? Would it matter if they did? Marriage is the blessed arrangement and institution ordained by God in paradise, and it has been confirmed as honorable among all men. It is therefore not to be undertaken lightly or thoughtlessly, but with reverence and in the fear of God. The irony of those words, about not undertaking marriage lightly, while watching someone who'd turned marriage into a murder weapon, wasn't lost on me. If any person can show just cause why they may not be joined together, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. The moment arrived faster than I expected. The traditional words that usually pass without incident in modern weddings, a formality that Pastor Williams probably hadn't seen, interrupted in his decades of performing ceremonies. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking with adrenaline and terror. I do. The church went silent so completely I could hear the air conditioning humming. 300 people turned to stare at me. I felt their shock, their confusion, their judgment washing over me in waves. Jake's face went white, then red with embarrassment and fury. Meredith's expression flickered rapidly through surprise, rage, and then quickly settled into hurt confusion, her default manipulation tactic. I object to this marriage, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room despite my trembling hands. Jake stepped forward from the altar, his face a mask of humiliation and anger. Sarah, sit down. Now. This is completely inappropriate. I can't do that, I said, reaching for the folder hidden in my dress. Everyone needs to see this. Everyone needs to know what's really happening here. Meredith's eyes locked onto the folder like a predator spotting prey, and for just a second, her carefully constructed mask slipped completely. I saw pure, murderous hatred flash across her face before she composed herself and shifted into victim mode. I'm so sorry, everyone, she said to the crowd, her voice shaking with practiced emotion and tears starting to form in her eyes. Jake's sister has been struggling with some serious personal issues lately. She's been against our relationship from the very beginning, and we've tried to be understanding and supportive. Murmurs of sympathy rippled through the guests. Several people nodded knowingly, their faces showing pity for what they assumed was a family dealing with mental health struggles. It was easier to believe that explanation than the truth. Sarah has been in therapy, Jake added, trying to salvage the situation and minimize the embarrassment. She's having trouble accepting that I've moved on from my divorce and found happiness again. I walked toward the altar, opening the folder and pulling out the first document. Meredith, tell everyone about your phone call on Easter Sunday. The one where you discussed keeping our grandmother sick until after the wedding so you could inherit the family business. The color drained from Meredith's face so quickly I thought she might faint, but she recovered with impressive speed. I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, she said, tears starting to flow freely now. This is my wedding day. How could you do this to me? To your own brother? Because I have it recorded, I said, pulling out my phone. Would you like me to play it for everyone? I pressed play, and her voice filled the silent church, crystal clear and unmistakably hers. The wedding has to be before his grandmother dies. That inheritance won't transfer if we're not married. The lawyers were very clear about the marriage clause. Just keep playing sick until then, and we'll split everything 60-40 like we discussed. The room erupted in gasps, whispers, and shocked exclamations. I watched faces change from confusion to horror as the implications sank in. My grandmother clutched her chest, her face pale with understanding and betrayal. Jake stared at Meredith like he'd never seen her before, which in many ways he hadn't. I wasn't, Meredith started, but I was already pulling out more evidence, spreading papers across the altar like I was laying out a case for a jury. Here are her credit reports showing $47,000 in active debt across multiple accounts, I announced, holding up the documents. Here's her browser history, documenting months of research into our family's finances, inheritance laws, and murder methods. Here are records of her 2 previous marriages to wealthy men who both died under suspicious circumstances shortly after their weddings. I spread the papers across the altar, creating an undeniable display of evidence that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as jealousy. She didn't meet you by accident, Jake, I continued, my voice growing stronger as I saw doubt creeping into his expression. She's been tracking our family for months, waiting for the right opportunity to strike. You're not her first target. And if this marriage happened, you wouldn't be her last victim. Jake picked up one of the credit reports with trembling hands, scanning the numbers that told the story of Meredith's desperate financial situation. Meredith? Is this real? These debts? These dates? She was trapped, her carefully constructed lies crumbling in real time as hundreds of people watched. But Meredith was a survivor who'd perfected her craft over years of deception, and survivors adapt quickly when cornered. Okay, yes, she said, dropping the innocent act entirely, and speaking in a voice I'd never heard from her before. Cold, calculating, completely different from the sweet girlfriend persona. I researched your family before we started dating, but that's just being smart in today's world. Everyone does background checks on people they're going to commit to. It doesn't mean I don't love him. You told us you'd never been married before, Jake said quietly, his voice hollow with betrayal. I said my previous relationships didn't work out, she replied with a shrug. That's technically true. Death is the ultimate relationship failure. 2 husbands died, Meredith, both mysteriously, both wealthy, both shortly after marrying you. She actually laughed, a sound completely unlike any laugh she'd ever made around our family. It was harsh, bitter, and utterly without warmth. Mysteriously? She mocked. Harold had a heart attack because he was 300 pounds and lived on nothing but bacon and whiskey. Robert fell downstairs because he was drunk 20 hours a day and could barely walk straight. If that's mysterious, then every widow in America should be under investigation. The cold calculation in her voice, the casual way she dismissed the deaths of men she'd supposedly loved, was terrifying. This was who she really was underneath the sweet, vulnerable act, a predator who viewed human lives as business opportunities. My father stepped forward from the front row, his face red with anger. Young lady, I think you need to leave. Immediately. I'm not going anywhere, Meredith snapped, her mask completely gone now. This is my wedding, and these are lies being spread by a jealous, mentally unstable woman who can't handle her brother moving on with his life. Then explain the phone conversation, I challenged, holding up my phone again. Explain planning to keep our grandmother sick until after the wedding. Explain discussing splitting Jake's inheritance with someone. For the first time since I'd known her, Meredith had no immediate answer. She looked around the room, possibly calculating her options or looking for escape routes, then seemed to make a decision. Fine, she said with venom, pulling off her engagement ring and throwing it at Jake's feet where it clinked against the marble floor. You want to believe your psychotic sister over me? Go ahead. But you're making the biggest mistake of your life. She started walking toward the back of the church, her wedding dress trailing behind her like a white flag of surrender. But she stopped at the door and turned back, her face twisted with rage. Jake, when you realize what you've lost, don't come looking for me, she snarled. And when your precious sister destroys every relationship you ever try to have because she can't stand to see you happy with anyone, remember this moment. Remember that you chose her mental illness over my love. She walked out, and nearly half the guests followed her, some supporting her, others just eager to witness more drama in the parking lot, or simply wanting to escape the uncomfortable situation. Jake stood among the scattered papers, still holding her credit report, surrounded by the ruins of what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life. His dream wedding had become a public nightmare in front of everyone he knew and respected. Jake, I said softly, approaching him carefully like he might bolt. I'm so sorry it happened this way, but don't. He held up his hand, his voice hollow. Just don't say anything right now. I can't. I need a minute to process this. Pastor Williams, clearly shaken by the most dramatic ceremony of his career, cleared his throat. Perhaps we should move this conversation to somewhere more private. My parents, Jake and I, ended up in the country club's manager's office while the remaining guests were directed to the reception hall for drinks and whatever explanation the staff could provide. Jake sat in a leather chair, still in his tuxedo, staring at the evidence spread across the mahogany desk like pieces of a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. How long have you known? He asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. I started suspecting things at Easter when I overheard that phone call, but I've been actively gathering evidence for about 6 weeks. 6 weeks. He nodded slowly, like he was trying to make sense of a timeline that didn't match his reality. And you didn't think to tell me any of this? I tried, I said, frustration bleeding into my voice. Every time I brought up concerns, you said I was jealous or mentally unstable. You threatened to uninvite me from the wedding when I tried to talk to you last night. Dad picked up the recording device, turning it over in his hands. Son, this is pretty damning evidence. The phone conversation alone suggests she was planning something terrible. I know what it suggests. Jake's voice was flat, emotionless. I need to understand how I got this so completely wrong. Again, how do I keep choosing women who want to destroy me? My mother sat beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder. Honey, this isn't your fault. She's clearly a professional at this kind of manipulation. A professional what? Con artist? Serial killer? How do I keep falling for people who see me as a target instead of a person? The pain in his voice broke my heart. This was exactly what I'd been afraid of, that even saving him would somehow damage him further, that exposing Meredith's deception would make him question his own judgment about everyone. You didn't choose this, I said firmly. She chose you. She researched you, studied you, tracked you down, and manipulated you with surgical precision. Nothing about your relationship was real or random or based on your choices. Detective Morrison arrived an hour later. I'd called him before the ceremony, asking him to be on standby in case my objection actually worked and we needed law enforcement. He interviewed all of us, reviewed the evidence with the serious attention it deserved, and made several phone calls to colleagues in other states. The deaths of her previous husbands are being reopened as active investigations, he told us after finishing his calls. And we're looking at multiple fraud charges related to the false identity documents she used to research your family's finances and the identity theft involved in obtaining your credit reports. False identity? Jake looked up with confusion. Meredith Ann Collins isn't her real name, Detective Morrison explained. She's actually Michelle Carter, and she has an extensive record of small-time cons going back 15 years. Marriage fraud, credit card scams, insurance claims, identity theft. She's been building up to bigger targets as her skills improved. Jake was quiet for a long time after Detective Morrison left to coordinate with other agencies. Finally, he looked directly at me. I owe you the biggest apology of my life, he said. Not just for today, but for weeks of dismissing your concerns and calling you crazy. You don't owe me anything, I replied. You're my brother. Protecting you is my job. Even when I'm being a complete idiot who won't listen to reason, especially then. We spent the rest of the evening in the hotel bar, still in our wedding attire, getting progressively drunker while Jake processed the reality of his near miss. Some of the wedding guests joined us, curious about the dramatic turn of events and wanting to make sure Jake was okay. By midnight, it had turned into an oddly festive gathering, a celebration of a bullet dodged rather than a marriage celebrated. You know what the worst part is? Jake said around 1 a.m., loosening his bow tie and looking more relaxed than he had in months. I actually thought I was getting better at judging people. After Sarah, I promised myself I'd be more careful, more observant, more aware of red flags. And instead, I picked someone even worse. Sarah was a cheater and a thief, I pointed out. But she wasn't planning to murder you for your life insurance. There's a significant difference in the level of evil we're talking about here. Yeah, one's more creative than the other, he said with dark humor. Our cousin David, who'd stayed for the impromptu reception, raised his glass. Here's to Sarah for saving Jake's life and probably his inheritance. Here's to families who don't give up on each other even when it's hard, Jake corrected, clinking his glass against mine. 3 weeks later, Detective Morrison called with major updates. Meredith Michelle had been arrested in Las Vegas while attempting to marry a casino owner using yet another false identity. The investigations into her previous husbands had uncovered evidence of digitalis poisoning in both cases, a plant-based toxin that mimics heart attack symptoms and is nearly undetectable without specific testing. She was facing multiple charges of murder in the first degree, fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft across 4 states. Jake had his locks changed and hired a private security company after receiving several threatening phone calls from an unknown number that we all assumed was Meredith calling from jail. He also started therapy with a specialist in trauma and manipulation to work through what he called his broken picker when it came to relationships. I need to understand why I'm attracted to people who want to hurt me, he told me after his first session. There has to be something I'm missing, some pattern I'm not seeing. 6 months later, our grandmother passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by family who loved her. Jake inherited the family business as intended, but more importantly, he was alive to receive it and honor her memory. At her funeral, he squeezed my hand during the service. She would have been heartbroken to know what almost happened, he whispered. She would have been proud that family protected family, I whispered back. A year later, Jake started dating Emma, a 3rd-grade teacher from the elementary school near his house. She was kind, genuine, financially independent, and had her own career and life goals. More importantly, when Jake told her about what had happened with Meredith, she was horrified rather than impressed, which seemed like an excellent sign for his recovery. I'm going to need you to investigate her too, Jake joked when he first brought Emma to Sunday dinner. Already did a preliminary background check, I replied with a grin. Clean credit history, stable employment for 6 years, no mysterious dead husbands, and she insisted on paying for her own coffee on your first date. You're good to go. You actually ran a background check? Emma asked, laughing. After what happened, I'm running background checks on everyone who comes within 10 feet of my family, I said. It's nothing personal. It's completely personal, Emma replied. And I respect that. Family should protect family. As for me, I learned that sometimes protecting the people you love means risking their anger, resentment, and even their relationship with you. I learned that family loyalty isn't just about supporting each other's choices. Sometimes it's about refusing to support them when those choices are dangerous, even if that refusal causes pain in the short term. And I learned that standing up in front of 300 people and destroying a wedding is simultaneously the most terrifying and most necessary thing I've ever done in my life. Jake and Emma got engaged this past Christmas. They're planning a small ceremony next spring, just immediate family and close friends at our parents' house. Jake asked me to be his best man instead of a traditional bridesmaid. I need someone who'll speak up if anything seems wrong, he said when he asked. Always, I promised. That's what family is for. Meredith Michelle was convicted on 2 counts of murder in the first degree and multiple fraud charges across 4 states. She's serving life without the possibility of parole in a maximum security facility. Her appeals have all been denied. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed silent that day, if I'd let the wedding proceed and hoped for the best, if I'd chosen to avoid conflict rather than cause a scene. But then I look at my brother, alive, happy, and building a healthy relationship with someone who genuinely loves him for who he is. And I know I made the right choice. Family protects family, even when it's messy and uncomfortable and humiliating, even when it means standing up at an altar and destroying everything in front of hundreds of people, even when it costs you temporary relationships and social standing. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to let someone you care about destroy themselves, even if they hate you for it in the moment.